Last night.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hope everyone had a great night. Enjoyed Portland. Thanks. I'm Deb McIndeffer, and I'm proud to present our opening presentation for the morning. WECC put together a cold weather strategy based on risk. And as you know, the standards weren't mandatory and enforceable, or some of them weren't yet. So part of our strategy was to do some assurance visits, which is not a compliance activity, but really more of looking at controls, looking at readiness for the standards, and really trying to understand what the utilities are doing. So James Hansen is with us this morning, and Curtis Cruz are with us this morning. They were a big part of these assurance visits, and they're going to share some of the lessons learned and some of the things that they learned during these assurance visits. So join me in welcoming them.
Thanks, Deb. So I'd like to start off just by thanking the presenters from yesterday. I think the messages that they shared were well prepared and really on point for where we are with industry right now. And also, it's you guys are a great audience. A lot of the follow-up questions really showed your engagement. So I hope that we can continue that momentum throughout the day today. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is James Hansen, and I'm the manager of the Operations Analysis Group at WECC. Operations Analysis is on the RAPIS side of the company. And we have the delegated responsibilities from NERC for situational awareness, event analysis, and we have joint responsibility for performance analysis as well. So there's always a lot to do in the group, but it's great work. I love to be a part of it. So my message today is going to focus on some of the efforts that WECC has been involved with regarding the recommendations that came out of the Winter Storm Elliott report. That came out just about a year ago now. And several recommendations came down to the regions and NERC to perform some readiness verifications. So those of you that were in the March workshop, I shared some efforts that were underway. The first one was recommendation 1B. And recommendation 1B tasked us to identify the highest potential risk units and to perform verification on those units. So in May of this year, we wiped the sweat off of our brow and patted ourselves on the back and said, we've accomplished 1B. And then we looked at the next recommendation of 1C and realized our work was not done, and we got to work. And 1C tasks the regions and NERC to perform targeted cold weather verifications using risk-based approach. So as Greg Park shared yesterday, we don't like to go off of feel when we're determining who is going to be involved with efforts like this. We like the data to drive us. So we use different data sets that are available to us to help with the selection process for both recommendation 1B and 1C. So some of that data, one of them was the GADS database. And we looked specifically for units that were impacted by cold weather outages or freezing conditions. We also looked at the NERC alert data that came through, the NERC alert for generator readiness that came through last year, and we pulled information from there. We also looked at the geographical location and the generation type, just to address inherent risks that were applicable to those sites. This was a joint effort between WECC and NERC, but WECC really did take the lead, and that's appropriate. We know the interconnection better. We know our entities better, and we know the geographical challenges that are facing various units better. So that was the role that we took, was kind of the lead on what plants will be included in this effort, as well as developing a team within the organization. So a lot of the time at WECC, a task will be given to a department or an individual group. We did something a little bit different on this effort. We looked at the expertise within the organization, and we put together a cross-departmental team here. We did that so that we as an organization would be able to gain as much value from this effort as possible, but also to be able to provide value back to the entities that we've selected to be involved with this. As you can see, there's multiple groups within the organization represented from this team, and it does span across compliance and oversight, as well as the RAPID department. So a true cross-departmental team throughout the organization. From there, we had to determine what questions, what general topics we were going to cover with these requests for information, the RFIs that we were going to be sending out to these different plants. From the NERC alert that came in 23, there were several entities that were involved that had open essential actions that were identified in that NERC alert. So the team wanted to know what was leading to those essential actions not being completed. Were these capital or time-intensive projects? Were there supply chain issues? Or was it something else that was leading to those actions not being completed? We asked several questions about cold weather plans, maintenance, and training that were in place. Those were really there to gauge the maturity of plans that were in place. We did ask questions regarding cold weather events that impacted those the sites that we asked to participate in this effort. And I mentioned that the group that I'm in right now has the responsibility for event analysis. For the utility that I worked for prior to coming for WECC, I was involved with event analysis. I led the event analysis work here at WECC for over 5 years. I volunteered for the event and performance analysis subcommittee liaison within the WECC structure, and I'm the incoming chair to the NERC event analysis subcommittee in the NERC committee structure. And I share that because I am passionate about event analysis. To me, event analysis is synonymous with continuous improvement. We are operating a very complex system, and we have these plans in play to put us in a good position when we are facing these extreme conditions. But we know we're also going to still have events on our system, and these events offer opportunities to learn more about our plants, about our system, as well as putting ourselves in a better place after that event than we were prior to it. And that's why that was really the basis on why we were asking questions regarding those events. Not why did you have them, but what did you learn from these events on your system? We also selected several units that had ECWTs above 32 degrees, and yet looking at the GADS database had multiple outages due to cold or freezing conditions. So we wanted to know what were the conditions that led to those outages, and when those conditions were forecasted, is there something that those plants could do so that they could continue to operate in those conditions. And we also wanted to know what freeze protection measures were in place and how those were monitored. So just some general topics that we included in the RFIs that were sent out. So with that in place, we held webinars with the selected entities, at least in the spring we did. And in the spring, we described what we were doing, why they were selected, and we reviewed the questions to make sure what we were asking was clear. Now, and then we offered assistance throughout the reporting period. In the fall, due to bandwidth and also the fact that we had shared this process that we went through in the spring in several different venues. So we did not hold those webinars. We included detailed instructions and made ourselves available through the reporting period. I would like to give a thanks to all of the entities that have been involved with these efforts. All of the responses came back in time. And I know that that takes a concerted effort because your resources are limited. And that shows that you made this effort a priority. And I do thank you for that. So once the responses came back in, our team dove into what was provided. And there were some specific things that we were looking for in these responses. We were looking for follow-up questions that we had to, follow-up information we needed. We were also looking for standout practices, best practices, as well as practices where improvement could be made. So with that information, in the spring, we held follow-up calls and gained this information through site visits. This is actually where we are right now in the 1C effort. Those requests for follow-up calls or a request for an on-site visit will be going out in the next week. And that is how we will get that's how we will gain the additional information we need, as well as sharing what stood out to us as far as good practices and areas for potential improvement. We want this effort to be as valuable as possible. So for each of the entities involved, in addition to having those conversations with them, we are providing an observation sheet. Those observation sheets include some aggregate information that we've now, between the two efforts, have had conversations with several entities in the interconnection. So we are including aggregate information as well as targeted information for their specific plant. So we are also taking opportunities to share our findings in national efforts we've been invited to, as well as regional efforts such as this and the winter preparedness seminar that took place in September. So I'm going to touch on some general observations that that our team has made. And the first one that stands out is the entities in the Western Interconnection are paying attention to what is going on throughout the rest of the nation. They are recognizing the impact that cold weather has had in other regions. And we are seeing that from recommendations within the URI report, the Elliott report, already being incorporated into plans. We're seeing that by lessons learned at the site level on a seasonal basis being incorporated into plans. We're seeing lessons learned from the NERC library be incorporated into these plans. Many different data sources available, and we are seeing those already making their way into these plans. And that iterative process really is quickly making these plans mature. Many of these entities, they've been doing this work for years. They said we didn't need a standard to tell us what we needed to do to run reliable when faced in extreme temperatures. This is my observation. I'm not making a statement for WECC, but your efforts are paying off. And I make that statement because earlier this year in January, Winter Storm Gary and Heather, that combined storm came in and sat down in the Western Interconnection for the better part of a week. And we spoke with entities that had either record low or near record low temperatures for their regions. We spoke with other entities that were facing negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures, and that is before wind chill. Some areas were at negative 70 when you added that wind chill. No matter where you are in this planet, that is extreme temperatures. And we operate with using the GADS data and using conversations that we had with entities impacted by Heather and Gary. We had very little impact to our generation fleet. Now, I say that not to say we've whooped this thing, let's stop, and we don't need to do any more. I'm saying what you're doing right now in an iterative process is working. Continue to do it. Continue to learn what you can when you do have those outages on your system and put yourself in a better position next time those conditions arise. So other general observations, I've already talked about iterative processes on a seasonal basis improving. And that is something that we saw in several different instances. We saw audible alarming of freeze protection. When there's an issue with the freeze protection, the generator operators are notified. They know to get somebody out there immediately to fix that before it takes down the plant. And throughout the conversations, we saw several examples, multiple examples of strong internal controls. So I guess, let me back up. I'm an optimist. I love to focus on the positives, but I would be amiss if I were to leave off some of our observations that were a little bit more concerning. So one of the key ones was when we were reviewing responses that said, we plan on being compliant by October 1st because of an upcoming standard. That's telling us that, good job, you plan on being at minimum bar because you're forced to be at minimum bar. Not because of the other hand, the other examples that I already shared, where we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. We're doing this because so that we can reliably operate our plant no matter what the conditions are. And there's a big difference between those two approaches there. So that is one thing that stood out. The other is that iterative process lacking. And they said, oh, we do it in an ad hoc fashion. Well, we're all busy. And if we're doing it in an ad hoc fashion, probably falling between the cracks more than it's actually getting done. And then the one other thing that stood out to us is there were some great lessons learned, identified at particular plants, but sharing that information with the rest of that entity's fleet was happening at some entities. At other entities, they were like, oh no, we're not sharing that. So making sure that if you found if one plant has found something that's impacting them, share it with the rest of the fleet. So those are some items that stood out to our team. So through our work with recommendation 1B and 1C, and through conversations with some of our peers in other regions, WECC is putting together a generator readiness program. Some of the other regions have been doing cold weather readiness verifications for years. And that's probably appropriate because that is one of the greatest risks that their fleet is facing. We haven't seen the impact in the West like we have seen in other parts of the nation. Again, that doesn't mean we've whooped this thing, good job guys, let's go home. That means continue to do what you're doing. So, but the program that we're putting together, we feel really needs to have a lot more flexibility to it. Yeah, we're going to look for cold weather standouts and things that we can learn from cold weather verification. We can also look at the opposite end. Do we have outages due to extreme heat? We also want to be able to use this program to learn more about the performance of IBR plants than where their performance is not where we need it to be, or battery energy storage systems that are having issues. We need that flexibility because we have a changing resource mix that much of the other nation is not seeing at this time, with the exception of of Texas, of course. So we're building that flexibility into the program. This is something that's being developed at this time, and as it gets further down the road, we're happy to share more details on it. The last topic that I'm going to cover is recommendation 3 coming from the Elliott report. Recommendation 3 is focused on the readiness of Black Start units throughout the nation when looking through the cold weather lens there. So Curtis, my friend Curtis here, he's been involved with recommendation 1B, 1C. He's involved with recommendation 3. I don't know if he's an all-star or if he's being punished for something that he did, but he's been involved with all of these efforts and been a big contributor to all of these. This Black Start group met in Cleveland last week, spent the majority of the week working on this effort. This slide is a bit out of date right now. Those RFIs have gone out, responses are back in, responses are being reviewed. The team last week also focused on questions that will go to gas suppliers. So the effort is focused on the gas units, the Black Start gas units. So it's appropriate to reach out to those suppliers to ensure that they are part of that plan as well, and that we have the complete picture when we share our findings with industry. So the team has also put together a straw man for the report, and that will go out. And honestly, as we look at when that report will come out, let's look towards 25. There's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done, so that that later period there, early Q1 of 25, is probably when we're going to be seeing that report come out. There's been a lot of effort that has been put towards these various recommendations that FERC came out with the Elliott report. I know that we as an organization have learned a lot from our discussions with you. What are you doing to ensure reliability of our generation fleet? So I already feel there's been a ton of value that have come from these efforts. And my last slide here is just making some just providing some links to a couple of reports that I reference in that presentation. I'm going to turn the time over to Curtis now. Any questions that you have for me, let's please just hold them, and then we'll address questions on the efforts that we've done on Elliott recommendations or the implementation plans that Curtis is going to cover right now. We'll do that all at once. Thanks.
I tell you, it's hard to follow this man. He undersold himself. He's been very involved in a generator readiness program. It was great to see a cross-departmental list come together, a group of people that had a lot of experience, and me. And the reason I say that, back in 2012, I was invited to go out to a generator site. At that point, I was a compliance director for Texas RE. I got to go to one site because I asked a couple questions, and they said, no more compliance out there. We don't want the compliance piece. There wasn't any standards back then. back in 2012. There are standards now. You're living in the world of EOP 12-2, period. October 1st, 3-4 weeks ago, came into play after many, many years of development. And guess what? We're still not through. We're looking at EOP 12-3, working on that. I happen to be on the standard drafting team for that. It's very encouraging to get interaction from the industry on what is happening out there, what FERC dictated has to happen. That FERC order in June 2024 here, we'll talk a little bit about it towards the end of this, but really these implementation plans mean a lot to you as PCCs. They mean the world to you. And to James's point, it's not you start on October 1st. You probably started back in 2020, 2021, whenever this stuff was being developed. How do I incorporate these standards into my programs? What does that look like? How do I ensure reliability? How do I make sure that I've done enough to meet compliance, but actually done more than enough to meet reliability? And that is really the key. That's what happens in the world, events. We're all here because of an event. 2003, that's the reason PCCs have jobs. The things that are going to be looked at in 2027. Same thing for the BA. There's a whole new section in there for the BA, provisions for excluding critical natural gas. If you have not started to identify those, don't wait. If you're a TOP or a BA, don't wait. Now in Texas, it's a little bit different because the PUC said you had to, and you had to work with the Railroad Commission, and you had to do all this mapping of critical. 15 minutes left. Is that the business? But understand that that's what we're going to be looking at. This is a pictorial of what to expect. I like pictures. That's what EOP 11 talks about in 1.2.5. Managing that interaction between UVLS, critical loads, UFLS, and load shed in general. Auditing thoughts. I didn't want to forget this one, right? Whenever you're talking about auditing, everybody in here, PCC related, they want to know what an auditor is thinking. Be careful what you ask for. But whenever you're talking about a process, develop, maintain, and implement, you're talking about internal controls. You're talking about how you manage that effectively. Where did you learn? We talked about lessons learned over here. As you went through and added loads in the system, how did you look at that in terms of emergency operations, in terms of making sure that the identification of the circuits was managed, that management of the circuits was dealt with? How you looked at that is going to dictate how well you do, plain and simple, from an auditing perspective. But it's also from a reliability perspective. You want to make sure you give those system operators the best tools available to them. You want to make sure that they're aware, where are my UFLS, where are my UVLS, what can I manually load shed, what I cannot. So make sure that you do that. Think about those inclusions, those roles, responsibilities. Anytime you get into develop an operating plan to do this, make sure these things happen. I think we've talked mostly about this, calculating an ECWT. It looks pretty simple, right? One slide, that's all EOP 12 takes. There's a lot of information in there. R1, everybody has to do. Everybody better calculate an ECWT, period. End of the story. Everybody better have a cold weather preparedness plan. Even those folks in southern Florida better have a cold weather preparedness plan. It's going to look a lot different than people in Wyoming, than people in Southern California. But they've got to have one, and they've got to meet those parameters. Training, they need to do training on it. Sometimes the training will be very simple. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll be very complex. Make sure you coordinate well with your GOP. Cap timelines, all those different things. There's the one slide. Explains it all. My job is done. You can draw a slide and walk away, that's good. Now, it looks kind of like Picasso a little bit, but he was all right. He made out all right at the end of the day. When you add the requirements in there, that's kind of what it looks like. You can have a generator cold weather reliability event, but it has no implications in terms of compliance if you're above ECWT of 32 degrees. So it's very critical how you develop that 32 degrees or how you develop that ECWT to understand what's happening. Do I need to move the mic up? Sorry for those online. Move closer. But if you look at this slide, it kind of dictates what those requirements are and how they are impacted by what you do. So above 32 degrees, after October 1st, that vertical line is October 1st, you need to understand that those are the options that are available to you. Now, auditing thoughts, we talked about data missing. We talked about that shoe missing. Someone's going to find it someday. They're going to wonder where it was. They're going to look for a different source and find data. Think about how you manage that missing data. Tell that story. Generator cold weather critical components, make sure you identify those well. Check your trip circuits on your generator units. Evaluate what might freeze, what's in control, what's in your control. Call them out, document them, make sure freeze protection measures are there. If it's inside a building, just don't go, oh, it's inside a building, I'm excluded. Down towards the bottom, we talk about HVAC. Is the heater included in the freeze protection measures? Well, I'm an engineer and I tend to remember that heaters kind of help freeze protection, but it's not a freeze protection measure on generator cold weather critical components for the standard. So it's not one of those. But we recommend that you do maintenance on that heater. That's what keeps that building hot. That's what keeps it above 32 degrees. Make sure you manage that effectively. If you look at the cold weather preparedness FAQ, and that is really from the SGAS, I was involved in the small group advisory session back in May. We developed a lot of questions, a lot of answers to a lot of questions from the industry. Have we answered them all? No. There are still questions out there. We're very much aware that I only have 5 minutes left, according to Tom, that there's a lot of questions still out there. Understand that interaction, that working with you, that having those discussions like James was talking about will help shape how we go through and evaluate what we're seeing out there. So please, the cold weather constraints, EOP 12-3, we adjusted a lot. That's the shout out to Tony that I talked about. If you really think about internal controls and thinking about EOP 12, you're thinking about preventing, preparing, responding, and recovering from events. And we had a very good discussion, Molly and I, with that group. Is very energetic, and we appreciate that opportunity to do that. Project 2403, it's a new version. Yeah, I said we're in EOP 12-2. We're on the way to EOP 12-3. It is at ballot right now. Next week, the comments are due. If I'm not mistaken, the 4th or the 5th. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head. But FERC was not extremely happy. Remember, they said, okay, EOP 12-1, we'll pass it. Go fix it. Here's some things to go fix. Come around to EOP 12-2. Yeah, June. Yeah, we'll accept it, move forward, but fix these things and fix them within so many months, March, I think, of 2025. So the standard drafting team, very diverse group of people. I got the opportunity to be involved, looked at what the FERC objectives were, what the FERC directives were, and tried to develop language to meet that. You may not be happy with what FERC asked us to do or asked you to do at the end of the day. But look at the language, see if it supports those directives, see what's happening there. There are some additional processes out there. NERC has a cap extension process and a constraint process. That's going to be very critical in how you approach those two items within that standard. NERC and ERO Enterprise wants feedback on that process. That process is not a voting item, but it is something that's critical to you to understand what your obligations are, quote unquote, when you get into corrective action plans and extension of those plans. So please take a look, but these directives are very, very emphatic. We had a lot of interaction with the FERC staff. I think we've done a pretty good job in capturing it. Now, the last slide I think I have today, to meet your 5 minutes, Tom, is about IBR Cat 2. There's going to be a bigger discussion this afternoon. If you think about what Category 2 is, Mark has the definition. I don't remember all the definitions. 20 MVA at 60 kV at a single point of interconnection, something like that. I don't have the tattoo yet. Mark does. But there was a question during the development phase and just during the thought process. How is EOP 12, EOP 11, how is that going to interact with these Cat 2 generator sites. What does that look like? And Howard, he's not here today, is he? He left? Darn, I was going to tell him he was right. Howard was right. It's going to be up to you in many ways to determine that applicability. So that call for interaction, that call for action on your behalf. When we get to standards under development in block 3, when we talk about those standards in the future, you're going to have to look at, does it make sense to have a cold weather preparedness plan for a Cat 2? Does it make sense for training? What does it mean from a reliability perspective to lose those plants? What does it mean? And that's really the key. So as we move forward, I think there'll be more development on the IBR side. We'll certainly provide that information. But I hope you got a good idea, and sorry about the slides. Opportunity is always fun. I'm glad I read them this morning so I could go back over them. But the idea here is that we're taking a very holistic approach to generator readiness. We're just not about entity monitoring. We're just not about RAPA. We're just not about risk. We're looking at all this together and trying to come to a good idea of how the Western Interconnection is evaluating that risk, addressing that risk, mitigating that risk, and being successful. So I hope you have a lot of questions for James, because he's ready to talk. But I think that was it. So if you do have any questions, we're on time. Are there any questions? Somebody turn off the mics. Leland? Is that Leland? I think he's going to ask you.
Yeah, actually.
Ooh.
Testing. Awesome. That was good timing. Yeah, actually, I do have as much as I'd love to give you a hard time, Curtis, I do have a question for James. So, and it's actually an easy one. So it reminds me of the program that you're working on, kind of reminds me of like the assist visit program for reliability first. So I guess the question is, can we, request a review, to come on site and check things out, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. We'd be happy to take those requests and provide insights on what we find. So I'm familiar with the assist work that they do over there. What we've done over here is a little bit different with the assurance, but this program has the flexibility to be able to take a request and be able to provide some insight on it. So thanks, Leland.
Awesome.
I'll add one more thing to that. Leland, I'll add one more thing to that. We actually got asked, will you look at cold weather preparedness plans? And actually somebody provided one to us. And I think the team had it, and we looked at it and evaluated and came back with very good results. One thing that we didn't talk about, and I think we need to make this abundantly clear, what do stockbrokers say? Current performance doesn't mean future performance will be the same, something like that. And you see that on all your paraphernalia. In the interactions that we had in the fall and early spring there, the entities that we went out and evaluated, we went to, in this case, they were all high impact, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Tom? And they might have all been high impact entities. And we told Tom, don't need to do compliance monitoring with these folks. We felt good enough. We had reasonable assurance based on that interaction that they were managing that risk effectively. And there was not a need to go out there and go, let's look at EOP 11-2, R7, R8, whatever the case may be. That's not always going to happen. But I think to Sally's point, sometimes, we enforce the rules in the standards, whatever the language is in the standards, but we can monitor a lot of different ways, using a lot of different tools to understand how people are mitigating risk. And so that was an important aspect that we didn't emphasize, but I think it's important for you to know.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. That also makes me think of like I dabbled in safety and like the VPP efforts where, those entities don't even get audited. Like the peers come and review them and, and that sort of thing. So I don't know, the whole regulatory landscape could change, but yeah, good thoughts.